In May 2017, Western media announced that the DNA of 90 Egyptian mummies had been analyzed, suggesting they were of Middle Eastern and European origin. This news spread worldwide, pleasing those who believed Egypt was predominantly white and upsetting those who viewed it as an African civilization. This DNA-based research study on Egyptian mummies, published in a prestigious journal called Nature, has indeed set off a new wave of deception in the field of Egyptology. We are confident in our critique of this study, one that needs to be nipped in the bud before it sets a whole new generation of cultural appropriation by the West. One might wonder why this paper has not received any backlash. We will answer this question with the following question. Who walks in those ivory towers of Western academia? You guessed it, the very people fueling misinformation about ancient Egypt. The paper in question is titled, Ancient Egyptian Mummy Genomes Suggest an Increase of Sub-Saharan African Ancestry in Post-Roman Periods.
Ceux, et le tuyau là, ceux qui sont noirs, les noirs, et leur pays, Kemet, la négricie, le pays noir.
Il est certain que les savants d'il y a 150 ans, les contemporains de la naissance de l'égyptologie moderne savaient parfaitement que l'Égypte était une civilisation nègre et négro-africaine. Il ne manquait pas de science, absolument pas. Mais ils ont falsifié sciemment l'histoire.
Here's a summary of its abstract. Egypt, located on the Isthmus of Africa, is a key region for studying historical population dynamics due to its geographic location and interactions with ancient civilizations in Africa, Asia, and Europe. During the first millennium BCE, Egypt experienced foreign domination, leading to an influx of foreigners who may have contributed genetically to the local population. This study presents 90 mitochondrial genomes and genome-wide data from 3 individuals obtained from Egyptian mummies. The samples, recovered from Middle Egypt, cover approximately 1,300 years of history, from the New Kingdom to the Roman period. The analyses show that ancient Egyptians had more genetic similarities with Near Easterners compared to present-day Egyptians, who have more sub-Saharan African ancestry due to recent admixture. This study establishes ancient Egyptian mummies as valuable sources for understanding ancient human history and provides insights into Egypt's genetic past on a genome-wide level. We have reviewed this study and will demonstrate that, contrary to its claims and interpretations, ancient Egyptian civilization was black and fundamentally African. To determine the people at the origin of a civilization, the process begins with thorough historical documentation. This helps identify the key sites to excavate and the correct periods to examine. By carefully selecting both the sites and the periods, we can avoid misleading conclusions and accurately trace the origins of a civilization. For example, when studying ancient Egypt, it's important to focus on primary sites and periods relevant to the civilization's founding. This involves examining the oldest and most significant tombs, monuments, and artifacts, as well as considering the historical context of invasions, migrations, and cultural exchanges. Only by combining precise archaeological evidence with historical records can we gain a comprehensive understanding of the true origins of any civilization. We will discuss the chronology of Egyptian civilization shortly. Imagine a hypothetical situation. If France disappeared today, and 2,000 years from now, archaeologists tried to uncover who created it, the first step would be to consult historical documents to identify the significant locations of this ancient state. They would discover that many important figures in French history are buried in royal tombs in Île-de-France and in the Pantheon in Paris. Excavating these sites would reveal that French civilization was primarily established by white people. On the other hand, if archaeologists went to Marseille, they might find many Berbers and Arabs in the cemeteries. It is worth noting that Berbers and Arabs will be more recent inhabitants of France if you lay out the timeline of migrations in France. This could lead to the incorrect conclusion that Berbers and Arabs founded France. In addition to location, it's crucial to consider the correct time period. Historical records would show that Marseilles experienced a significant influx of Arabs and Berbers around the middle of the 20th century. To accurately identify the city's founders, archaeologists would need to focus on older remains, particularly those from late antiquity. These older remains would provide a more accurate representation of the original inhabitants of France. Hopefully, you have reoriented your perspectives as a listener after these simple analogies. Now let's proceed by examining the issue of chronology. Historical records provide a detailed account of Egypt's rulers and their origins over millennia. Around 4000 BC, the first dynasty emerged between Sudan and southern Egypt, eventually conquering the entire north by 3300 BC. This was during Nare Mari's time. From 3300 BC to 1730 BC, these dynasties from southern Egypt and Sudan ruled exclusively. Between 1730 BC and 1540 BC, the Hyksos, an occupying dynasty likely of white descent, conquered the north, while native kings retreated to their southern stronghold. From 1540 BC to 1070 BC, indigenous dynasties regained control and ruled the entire country. Between 1070 BC and 663 BC, Black Libyans associated with whites ruled the north, with indigenous power retreating to the south. Eventually, the Sudanese ruled the whole country. Between 663 BC and 332 BC, Egypt experienced a chaotic succession of white Persian occupiers and native Egyptian rulers. From 332 BC to 639 AD, the Greeks and subsequently the Romans, entering from the north, dominated Egypt. From 639 AD to the present day, Arabs have ruled Egypt, with intervals of Turkish and British control. So what does this mean? Well, to determine the genetic origins of ancient Egyptians reliably, we should examine the remains of rulers from southern Egypt, particularly in the Valley of the Kings in Luxor. The most relevant periods are between 4000 BC and 1730 BC and 1540 BC and 1070 BC. These two historical periods represent Egypt without foreign interference. You might be wondering, has this study examining the DNA of mummies from these time periods been done? The answer is yes. This approach has already been undertaken in various studies, providing crucial insights into the genetic makeup of ancient Egyptians. The main study from 2012, conducted by the American laboratory DNA Tribes, examined the DNA of three famous pharaohs, Amenhotep III, Tutankhamun, and another likely to be Akhenaten. It also included Akhenaten's maternal grandparents, the influential priests Yuya and Tuya. It is worth noting that the unnamed mummy was presumed to be the famous Akhenaten based on the fact that his DNA profile matched the confirmed mummies of Yuya and Tuya. These figures reigned around 1400 BC. The results were clear, they were native to Africa. Looking at the results table from the DNA tribe study, we can clearly see the following facts comparing the likelihood of the mummies being from various parts of the world. A genetic compatibility index of 326 with the peoples of southern Africa, 323 with the Great Lakes region, 83 with Central and West Africa. In comparison, Semitic, European, or Berber populations showed a compatibility index between 3 and 7. Additionally, a 2012 study by Zahi Hawass et al., published in the BMJ, revealed that Pharaoh Ramses III, who reigned around 1200 BC, carried the E1B1A gene, an African gene almost exclusive to black populations in Africa and the African diaspora in the Americas. This gene is common among Angolans, for example. These findings received little attention in the West, unlike the highly publicized 2017 study. In 2013, DNA Tribes further analyzed the DNA of Ramses III and his son Pentauer, finding similar results. They were related to the peoples of the Great Lakes, Southern Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, and the Horn of Africa. This further supports the evidence that these ancient Egyptian rulers had deep African roots, aligning with findings from previous studies on other notable pharaohs. like Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun. These results highlight the African heritage of some of Egypt's most famous leaders. Let's take a close look at some images of important black personalities of ancient Kemet, or what Western scholars call Egypt. Tutankhamun and his wife, Queen Ankh-Sen-Imana, the daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the father of Akhenaten. Pharaoh Ramesu-Hekayunu, or commonly known as Ramses III by the West. Pharaoh Akhenaten. And finally, Nefertiti and Akhenaten. The study by Johannes Krauss and his group from the Max Planck Institute in Germany analyzed 91 mummies found in a single cemetery in northern Egypt. This site was the sole focus of the research. You can clearly see the northern cemetery where the mummies were found. If you look far to the bottom right, you'll find Luxor, where many pharaohs are buried. Even when a pharaoh died in the north, their remains were often transported to the south, similar to how people today are often buried in their hometowns. The ancient Egyptians were well aware that their origins lay in the south. We have previously discussed how the ancient Egyptians' ancestors migrated northward from the Great Lakes region, traveling up the Nile. As you may recall, we mentioned distinctive periods in Egypt, when the region was free from outside influences. These were the two periods, 4000 to 1730 BC, and 1540 to 1070 BC. Out of the 90 mummies, only 4 of the 90 mummies date from the great periods of native Egyptian reign, specifically before 1070 BC. The rest are from more recent times. Additionally, 48 of the mummies date from the periods of Greek and Roman occupation of Egypt. So, the majority of the mummies are from the time when Greek and Roman rulers controlled Egypt. The study revealed that the 90 individuals from later periods had maternal DNA primarily linked to populations from the Neolithic and Bronze Ages in the Levant, Near East, Anatolia, present-day Turkey, and Europe. Regarding paternal DNA, the study only analyzed 3 mummies, none from the prominent periods of native Egyptian rule. All these mummies are from times when northern Egypt was dominated by white foreigners, or had a significant white immigrant population. Therefore, these mummies cannot represent the people or kings of ancient Egypt accurately. The authors of the study themselves acknowledge the limitations of their research in terms of place and time. They state, there was a substantial increase in the population at the site where the mummies were collected during the first centuries of the Ptolemaic Greek reign, probably due to Greek immigration. Individuals with Greek, Latin, and Hebrew names are known to have lived at the site. They further add, however, we note that all of our genetic data was obtained from a single site in Middle Egypt and may not be representative of all of ancient Egypt. It is possible that populations further south in Egypt were closely related to Nubians and had a greater sub-Saharan genetic component. We would like to challenge the study authors by stating the glaring fact. None of the mummies from Luxor, a site that has some of the oldest mummies in Egypt, were evaluated in this flawed study. We proudly stand on the shoulders of our scholars, Cheikh Anta Diop and Théophile Obenga, to state categorically that Egypt was founded by black people from Africa. This fact is supported by overwhelming evidence from various fields, including genetics and linguistics, which clearly shows that the pharaohs were black and part of a distinctly African culture. Egyptian civilization is the heritage of black Africans. We are fully committed to reinforcing and spreading this truth. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.